Andy Jenkinson. Thanks very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. How are you?
It's a pleasure. I'm very well, thank you, David.
I'm very, very excited. Not often I get people with your caliber on the show, and it's magnificent. Let me just start. Maybe walk me through memory lane, just so people understand what you've done
Yep.
and the things you're about to say in this podcast carry some clout.
Sure. We set up cybersec innovation partners on the back of doing some work for NATO. And our chief scientist went into NATO because they suffered a cyber attack that utilized stolen certificates that were laced with malware in the form of Stuxnet. Of course, they couldn't find what they were looking for, as virtually no company in the world can. The complexity of digital certificates and PKI is massive. And at the time, back in 2017, we also couldn't find them because nothing proprietary on the market was available. So we developed Whitethorn. And we found these little monkeys, complete with laced malware, etc. And we sort of made a name for ourselves within that environment. Of course, we can't be too specific on who we work with, but it was a NATO operation. We then did some further work for other companies in the same space, and we found Russian and Chinese digital certificates, root certificates in critical infrastructure and other areas. And of course, that was very frightening for these companies. Unfortunately, it didn't do us any favors because people didn't want to know the truth.
Yeah, let it sit there. I'll let it linger there for a bit, Andy.
Linger a little bit, yeah.
let me ask you this. Talk to me about the whole digital certificates. For those who are listening, again, it's not trivial. This particular topic is sometimes being left in the kind of the wayside.
Sure.
People know about networking, they know about routers and switches, and they know about identity somewhat. They know about data flow and data store. What's so important about digital certificates? Maybe provide it from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that, David. It's a good idea. Let's go back chronologically a little bit to the early 1980s when PCs were starting to come out. We were children and PCs were coming out. And people said, well, okay, we'll just dispatch all of these PCs and computers. Security, who thinks about it? Nobody's thinking about it. A friend of mine, Dr. Paul Mockapetris, was tasked in 1983 to develop domain name systems, DNS. And this was one of the first ever protocols of the internet. And what it did was you and I and everybody else in the world can remember google.com, but we might not remember 4 numbers punctuated with dots in sequence. So DNS takes our text, google.com, that we can remember off the bat, and it translates that into numbers, enabling you to, or for the servers and computers to look up and retrieve that information. Okay, that's how DNS came about. About 10 years later, and that was first came out in 1986. Then about 10 years later, mid-90s, public key infrastructure came out, and public key infrastructure, I liken PKI to a digital passport. So, for example, you've got all the problems with the wall, and we've got problems with, people coming in on boats. The reality is, digital passports, how many people would you want to come into your country through JFK or wherever without a passport? How many would you let through? And the idea is you'd let none in. What happened through the 80s and 90s as computing became really, really popular, there were some very clever people, like the Alan Turings of the world, that said, well, hold on a minute. We now need to look at how we can encrypt messages and authenticate the users so that we haven't got people sitting on our shoulder, metaphorically, reading everything we're typing, reading everything we receive. So public key infrastructure was the development that in the 90s came out. It'd been going for some time through the intelligence agencies and academia in other forms for encrypted messaging. And it's a big bone of contention to this day. But the reality was PKI enabled certificate issuance to users and devices to authenticate them. So if we then take that a little stage further, it soon became realized that people could pick up someone else's device and they could pretend to be someone else, or they could spoof a situation. So we then moved into HTTP, HTTPS. And in 2004, Google actually drove the charge on this. They said, well, HTTP doesn't encrypt messages, okay? In 2008, it took 4 years. In 2018, 2014 to 2018, not 04 to 08, time goes by so quickly. 2018, HTTPS became the default position and the gold standard. So everything you send should be, or every website you go on should be HTTPS. Up until very, very recently, you used to get the not secure badge or text in the URL address, or you'd get the padlock. They've changed the padlock now. You've got 2 little lines with the circles. But a not secure website means one thing. It means the website cannot be authenticated with a certificate. There's a whole batch of reasons for that. And digital certificates imply real security issues everywhere, no matter what we do. So if you get onto a not secure website, it could be a spoof website. It could be an insecure website, and it'll tell you people are trying to capture your data, etc., etc. But a secure website, all that validates is a real critical issue here, David. All that validates is the certificate matches the issuance of the web host. Okay, it doesn't mean it's configured correctly, the DNS servers are right, it could be redirected. There's a whole host of things. I tell a lovely story, and it's a bit of a play on what I've done over the last several years. In 2020, I was invited by the Worshipful Company of Information Technology and Security Professionals, quite a mouthful. Who's who is in this group in the UK? You'll be familiar with the Worshipful Companies. It's run by a chap that became a bit of a friend of mine who had 35 years GCHQ experience. Hold that thought. And he said, Andy, look, what you're doing is trailblazing. Could you write an article for us to publish in the Digital Forensics magazine on digital certificates? So it's 2020, so it's nothing new. So I said, I'd be privileged to do so. So the title of the piece was The Modern Digital Enigma of Certificates. It was a play on the whole thing. And I wrote this article, 3,000 words, and if I say so myself, it was a pretty damn good article. I get a call from him about 3 weeks later saying, right, it's published, we've made some typos in the publication, but would you promote it to your 30,000 followers on LinkedIn? I said, it'd be my pleasure. Send me the link. He sends me the link, and it's not secure. So I phone him up, and I say, look, hold on, a bit embarrassing. People don't like being told they've got an ugly child. So I said, look, we got a problem. It's a not secure link. He said, absolute bullshit. I look after this myself. I've got 35 years GCHQ experience. I know it's secure. I issued the certificate myself. So look, please. It's not a debate I'm looking to have here. I'm informing you of a position. So we had this not heated discussion, but it was getting that way. And I said, look, please, just go on the link. Go on the link you sent me. And he's on the phone. He goes, oh, shit, it's not secure.
You can't even make that stuff up, Andy.
You can't make this stuff up. I've written about it in my first book. So I said, look, hold on. Do you want me to help you? He said, look, hold on. I've got 35 years experience. I'm one of the most experienced. I can sort this out. Oh, look, about an hour goes by, David, and I get another phone call. Andy, I can't find the problem. Could you help? So I said, stay on the phone. I've got 3 systems that I use. Stay on the phone and I'll find the problem. And I said, within 1 minute, HTTP is not redirecting to HTTPS. It's not even using the certificate you've issued. So he goes, are you kidding me? I said, no. So he goes on it and he goes, done. It's now secure. Now I can publish. Now, David, look, here's the real serious thing, because that's quite a funny story. I never lie. That's quite a funny story. the implications are all the members of that group are MI5, MI6, GCHQ, and others, and it was a not secure homepage because of that single error. That information is invaluable to anybody who wants to know who's who within the fraternity, and that was exposed for a period of time before I literally stumbled across it because I was asked to publish it. So we're very reactive in the security world, and unfortunately, we're very protective. I'd become a friend with this guy, and yet he wanted to be defensive and argue a position, even though I could evidence and demonstrate it. We get that daily.
Absolutely incredible story, but it shows the impact of even a misconfiguration that can cascade to horrible consequences. Something as simple as, and I believe that just fixing it, something like going to the DNS records on the website and then just creating a record.
Yep.
And then you're off to the races.
There's literally a switch.
Yeah, a switch. And I think that looking back at what you described, and thank you for walking us through the whole storyline, it sounds to me that inherently the internet was not secure to begin with. It was an open, open for all kind of thing. And then they're trying to create an overlay of security on top, which may or may not cause this whole issue of, we always know, like even when we're talking about software development and creating tools and so on, we always say, okay, let's embed security from the beginning, not as an afterthought.
Yep.
But it's not the case here. Here, as you described it, everything is completely open, and then some very smart people said, let's build, some security on top, which may or may not again cause, this inherent flaws into what we have. But it's maybe, do you think it's the best we can do, or is any other development in that field that will allow us to become better?
Look, let me walk you through how I see things, and I'm very black and white. A lot of people say I'm very contentious, but it's not true. I'm just black and white. I tell the truth. You've got the anniversary tomorrow, and I've written an article ready for publication on 9/11. Okay, 23 years ago tomorrow, the event occurred. I remember exactly where I was, as most people will. And the challenge with that was that the intelligence agencies up to that point had been tampering and manipulating for their own benefit the internet and communication. And we understand that. Phone tapping, wiring, the whole thing progressed in the digital era. So we got a situation in 2001 at 9/11 where Bush went into the war room and he said, I want to take dominance in the digital space. Okay, and they were all party to that, and billions of dollars were spent to give digital supremacy to the NSA and other agencies. The gloves were off, and they didn't care whose feet they trod on. Several months before that, excuse me, let me get rid of that. Several months before that, Jim Gosler, who was the godfather of cyber offense, the director of the CIA and NSA, he actually said at his retirement party in May of that year, 2001, either the intelligence agencies would learn to adapt or the internet would eat them alive. Well, it's pretty much come to fruition, what he said. And what Jim had done, he started Cyber Command for the United States intelligence agencies way back. And he started with two people. One was offense, one was defense. Okay, so it's a 50-50 split. Now you've got tens of thousands of operatives. They don't care about defense. All they want to do is be offensive. So you've got this unsexy defending position, which is what we're trying to do all the time. And you've got the guys out there looking for the sexy things to try and add malware or to, encrypt code that someone can't crack or whatever. So you've got this dilemma of an imbalance of offense and defense. So, for example, when CISA issued their emergency directive on DNS tampering and abuse in 2019, January, abuse of DNS had been going on for over 20 years. But they didn't want people to understand that. They didn't want people to defend against it because that would have scuppered their accessibility. So you've got this, again, this dilemma whereby the agencies want surveillance, and there's the huge debate over this debate of surveillance and privacy. Trust me, it's all compromised. You've got this huge issue of offense capability, and you've got the same modus operandi now, ever since Edward Snowden wrote his book, Permanent Record, in about 2012, 2013, that showed what the NSA and others were doing to exploit the internet. So what everyone turned around, whether, choose your country, Iran, China, Russia, whatever you want to do, or the kid next door. The reality is they turned around at that juncture and said, hold on a minute, if that's what the intelligence agencies can do, we can do that too. There's only one difference, David, is that the intelligence agencies, for their own justification, I'm not condemning them, for their own justification wanted to take surveillance to a different level for terrorism and other things. The cyber criminals want to take the same data but hold companies to ransom. Okay, there's no difference. They're exactly the same. So fast forward another decade to now, and when we help the FBI, as we have done, we're doing it right now again, when we've helped the FBI, we are having to educate them on the defense positions that need to be adopted because they've been too busy attacking. I'll give you an example, and it's public domain information now. I've written about it many times. In 2020, we were doing some work for a company, and a friend of mine who's sadly deceased, he was he lived in, in the north where the winter is, begins with A. You know where it is. And he turned around to me and said, Andy, look, you guys know what you're doing here. Could you, Alaska, I couldn't think of the name, Alaska. He said, you know, guys, could you check? I'm on the board of the Alaska committee, and we've got the presidential elections coming up in 2020. And this was around springtime, so April time. So we did some research, and on my team are a number of ex-US Cyber Command Force guys. And they said, oh, my God, Andy, what an opportunity. It's shot to pieces, and they've suffered 3 cyber attacks subsequently and prior. What an opportunity to look at all 50 states for the presidential elections, to just see, we had the tampering in 2016. Let's just see how secure the digital marketing place and the internet is for electric votes. So we did all 50, David. Not one was good. Not one. But what we found was, if you do some research like we do constantly, you see patterns. Patterns emerge. And what we found, because I'm not American, I'm a British guy. We found that all roads led to, in this case, vote.gov. Vote.gov is your repository for all of the 50 states to send all of their results to, for them to amalgamate them and to work with it. We found a Korean server inside the DNS of vote.gov in 2020. We helped the FBI. They got rid of it. They shut it down, and the rest was covered up. Here's the point that's really important, because I could tell you story after story, but the bit that really needs to be considered here, timelines are really key. In January 2019, CISA issued the emergency directive of DNS tampering. It's M-19-01, 19 and 01 of January 2019. In 2020, we found a Korean server inside the DNS of vote.gov, a US federal agency. So the emergency directive had zero effect on the entire setup of the presidential elections, for crying out loud. So you've got to start asking some serious questions. What is very apparent, and the emergency directive was issued on the back of federal agencies suffering DNS attacks. Up until that point, nobody wanted to talk about it. It's a taboo subject. It still is in many cases. I'm I'm just doing a piece actually for some attorneys on a rather large lawsuit that's going on right now from dodgy upgrades recently. Leave it at that. Even companies at the very top of this game worth billions don't understand DNS. They don't look after their internet assets, and time after time, we show them their problems, their issues, their exposure, and they want to stab us in the back. So I had this with the Bank of America. He's no longer there. I won't give you his name. It's too public. But he's no longer there. And this was when they were citing that they spend $1 billion on security. Hey, $1 billion. No one's going to get near us. I took the Pepsi challenge on that, and I, within 2 hours, showed them a number of exposed positions that could easily be exploited. And we call these internet assets, domains, subdomain servers, DNS, whatever. And he said that can't be true. A bit like my friend with the article I wrote. I said, well, I'm going to show you the evidence. I'm going to show you the demonstrable evidence. He came back, he said, it can't be true. No, we don't have that. It was, and again, I'm happy to cite this. This was 3 years ago. Ultra high net worth login for Bank of America clients. Not secure because of misconfiguration. Now, it only takes one, David. But what it demonstrates with the vote.gov and the FBI and the Bank of America, people aren't managing or controlling their internet assets in any way, shape, or form that's valid and gives them security, but they're happy to spend 10 million on endpoint security that actually is worthless if a website's left open or a server's insecure or it's on a DNS blacklist, for example. There's one more story I'd like to share with you that happened in 2020 at the beginning of COVID. And then you can ask me any questions you like. In 2020, the German government, like the rest of the world, were very keen to help small businesses survive the COVID-19 crisis, the lockdown. And they set up a website that enabled small businesses to go on a website, to punch in their details, and to claim up to 25,000 euros. All they had to do was give their details, and if it checked against the database, they'd get the money to help them through and survive. 2 weeks later, after initiating this, people started phoning up and saying, we've compiled all the data, we've sent all the information, could you give us some idea on timing? And so that went into a bit of a black hole. 2 weeks after that, they started chasing it up again because things were tight for everybody. And the German government said, but we've paid you. And the guy said, well, I haven't received anything. They saw this and the pattern started emerging, David. What had happened is a evil twin website had been stood up. It had taken over command control of the server. It was taking the data that was real data, populating the real government website, just changing one thing, bank details.
Brilliant.
100 million euros in 2 weeks was stolen by cybercriminals purporting to be real people making the claim.
Wow, Andy, we're in the wrong business. I'm telling you, we could have been on the beach with a tall, umbrella cocktail in a really nice tropical weather.
I'd be a multi-billionaire. Trust me. I could bring down governments today.
And it is incredible. You've written about digital blood on your hands. This is what it doesn't add up. We have the resources. We have people that are responsible, and we also have, you can't even say that they're not savvy enough, because you have people like yourself who can provide them the insight to know what to do and to take steps. So it's not a secret either. So, well, why then are we still in such influx in terms of, everything is such a shit show to coin your phrase, in terms of cybersecurity and the way things stand?
Well, how contentious do you want me to be?
We can blip, we can pixelate you after it. It's no problem.
Look, I'm out there all the time. I've written 4 books now, but the latest book that you're talking about is called Digital Blood on Their Hands. And it was, I was asked and commissioned to write that for my publishers on the Ukraine cyber wars that preempted the Kinetic War. And the reality is this: war is good for business. Think about that just for 1 minute. Now think about the next statement I'm going to make. The military-industrial complex is owned by 3 companies. Okay, they dictate pretty much everything. You will also see all of the biggest technology companies also have the same ownership. Okay, cyber war is also good for business. And in many ways, if we look and we take everything that's put out in the market, the defense budget in America is around $4 trillion a year. The losses to cybercrime are approaching 12 trillion a year. Okay. Cybercrime has a lot less cost base to it. Plus, it has a situation where it lacks attribution. So most people get away with it. I mean, good Lord, digital currency was, in my opinion, set up to enable a lot of this facilitation. And people have no idea. Blockchain loses billions of dollars left, right, and center through cybercrime. Is that not just money? Look, therein lies your problem. Now, if you look at, the very contentious situation of SolarWinds, and my first book was titled Stuxnet to Sunburst, 20 Years of Digital Exploitation, and it covered that in many ways. I actually wrote a Senate Intelligence Committee paper in January 2021 and hypothesized on the attack vectors, which all became fact. They were all proven to be fact. So it was a subdomain takeover and a DNS attack that SolarWinds suffered. And, there's a lot more to it than that, but that was the crux of it. The issue that SolarWinds had is that their DNS and their internet assets were shot to pieces. In many ways, they still are. And Tim Brown at the time, we helped, and it took 6 months for Tim Brown's team to finally address their top-level domain. Okay, again, you're saying, you've got experts like you guys. People don't want to listen. And CEOs are their own worst enemy. And I understand it's a human trait, because if you're paying a CISO, $250,000 a year, whatever, and you ask the question, you've got this bloody English guy telling you you've got a problem, and the CISO says, no, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So it's an ego. It's an ego problem either.
Ego, arrogance, and ignorance.
And that's prevalence. And
Very
maybe
prevalent.
because you have these high-paying paid executives sitting in all these committees, and after a while they start believing their own whatever so
it is incredible, David. It disappoints us on a daily basis that we just play with a straight bat. And as we work with expert witnesses and we provide expert witness testimonies and evidence to cases, it disappoints me that instead of trying to make companies do the right thing and protect their clients and the company and their own livelihoods, they'll cover up and bullshit and lie instead of doing the right thing. So, and then there's a revolving door. So, Uber are their own worst enemy. They have a huge problem. They lie about it. The guy gets, taken to court. He gets away with a sentence. They've just paid $283 million, or they've got a fine in Holland for privacy violation. And you go, why can't you just play with a straight bat? The world would be a really nice place if everyone played straight.
I think I think Uber, and it's really interesting you brought this up, they're notorious to breaking the rules, not just in the cyber and privacy, but also in
workforce, resource, everything.
Like even work, compensation.
Haven't we got to that in most companies? Most of the big tech giants, they don't ask for permission. They don't ask for forgiveness. They're too big to fail and too big to care. And, we're sitting here on this laptop now. We've got this conversation going on. We're totally reliant on those. Take those away. We don't have the conversation. So you've got millions of users. Look at the cyber attacks on Microsoft in the last year. 2 major cyber attacks, all because they're not managing their servers well, and they put it down to XYZ, and they'll pay a fine. The challenge with that,
exactly.
The challenge is that is what we call a filtered down economy situation, whereby Brad Smith won't pay any less, and Natalia Sadia won't pay any less in tax or earn less. It'll trickle down so their profits will be reduced against the losses, and they'll pay tax on the reduced amount. That impacts citizens. That impacts the government, who can only spend what taxes they receive. So it becomes a trickle-down economy that is literally devastating the economy, but the top people aren't suffering, and they're allowing it to happen.
And
I don't think it's too profound on that.
No, it's absolutely, and it's the cost of doing business. They assume they're going to violate the rules, and then they assume they're going to get fined. But it's okay, well, whatever. By the time we get there, and let's talk about even this whole lobbying going on right now in Washington. They're trying to pass, or they passed already, the regulation around securing AI, or doing it securely in a more ethical way. And it's so interesting because you have the AI companies telling them, recommending in Congress what type of laws they should, or regulation they should apply. So it's really interesting that that you have that they'll take advice from the organization they need to regulate.
It's a narrative. They're false narratives, David. And if you look and follow the money, you'll see where the money ends and who's involved with it. It's again, without being too contentious, you've got proxy wars going on at the moment, where that's being paid for, funded, and armed by various countries, as we know who they are, and debts are being incurred. And war is good for business. But here's the thing, and I'll send it to you if you want me to. You remember last year in September that an F-35B pilot was ejected out of an F-35B, and he was ejected. The plane crashed 60 miles an hour later. Well, the next day, hypothetically the next day, Lockheed Martin got another order for $100 million to replace the plane. Okay? Very good business. What you might not know is that for the last 2 years, 3 F-35B planes have suffered attacks like that, or downings. And we wrote a report for the JFHQ J3 team, which is the Joint Forces headquarters. It's the highest security clearance, guys. We did this on our own bat. Okay, we provided the report. We've helped the FBI and other agencies, but we're treated as poor cousins and kept out on a limb because of our expertise and knowledge, which is just crazy, but it jeopardizes their surveillance capability. So we proved that the 3 main protagonists, Lockheed Martin, Chris Blake, who make the ejector seats, and also Green Hill Software, who provide the operating system and the looms for these planes, were all exposed and compromised, to cyber threats. So we shared this report, which was pretty damning, and it's $1 trillion business and industry, the F-35, I'm sure you know. But the bit that people don't realize, here's the bit. The F-35 has 3 variants, A, B, and C. A is short or long, I forget which one, short or long for aircraft carriers or normal takeoff. The B is the vertical takeoff, and the C is long or short, depending on the A and B. The B, 3 F-35Bs have ejected their pilot because it's the only variant that it doesn't need the pilot's intervention to eject. Think about that for a minute. Now think about the Dali. Think about the Baltimore Bridge. Think about the FAA closing down the entire airspace that we helped them with on the 11th of January 2023 when they lost command control of their servers. Think about the implications, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. My friend is, who's a US Air Force ex-cyber command. He had his button on the nuclear. He had his thumb on the nuclear button. If that was proven to be fact, that these were all attacks, which we strongly suspect they were, what that says is we can close your airspace, we can stop you having air defense, and we can actually take out your F-35s without firing a shot. Think about the implications of that. If you then think about Rogers Communications in 2022, I recall, Rogers Communications supply half of the internet and communications for Canada. You may or may not know. Rogers were unfortunate in as much that week, the Prime Minister of Canada was in the Canadian government's offices debating whether they should release the Gazprom turbine that they'd been repairing because it would breach Russian sanctions. Putin got his team to attack Rogers Communications and said, "Give me back our bloody turbine or else we won't stop attacking you." They took out Rogers Communications for an entire day. They got their Gazprom turbine back that weekend.
And we
That's
can talk.
what we're putting up with.
Yeah, and we can talk about. I mean, over and over, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of these cases. I remember the John Deere tractors were disabled by Ukrainian forces because they were hijacked by the Russians or taken over by the Russians. And now you're thinking, okay, somebody else, just thinking out loud, somebody can disable all the John Deeres in the U.S. And before you know it, we're out of food within very short order.
And we've had that. David, we've had that. We've had, was it JB Foods? I think it was, I recall. They had a big cyber attack. You had the logistics company had a big cyber attack.
Yeah, the meat factory.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you had the Colonial Pipeline that started to close. But that's an interesting one because Colonial, again, their own worst enemy. You may not know this. Colonial paid millions in ransom, but they were maintaining a not secure homepage. They actually had their front doors wide open. And I always try to simplify the complexity of security. I always try. I'm not always successful, but I try. If you had 1,000 shops with high net products and goods inside them, how many would you want to lock up each day? All 1,000. Why don't we do the same in the digital space? We don't do it. And because they're interconnected, even worse in the digital space, unlike a shop in Maine or another one in New York, one in Florida, these are all interconnected because they're subdomains to the domain. You've only got to get access, as the SolarWinds scenario taught us. I can recite it. I'm very fortunate I've got a good memory most of the time. avsvmcleod.com was stood up and took over a subdomain of SolarWinds because it wasn't secure. They took it over and then got privileges in domain admin access into SolarWinds network. Why are we allowing that to happen? Why is somebody not saying how many domains we got, how many subdomains? Someone's job is to look after them. That's it.
Do you think that, again, we open up the kimono, we're exposing what's happening, but I have to tell you, I think the majority of the population, if they listen to this conversation, just googly eyes. Yeah. It's because it's so complex in nature, and unless you're part of it, it's very hard to understand. It's easier to understand, as you mentioned, a shop that needs to be locked and secure. But it's very hard to explain all these digital assets and domain and, open up a lookalike website and all of that. And people just assume, I think maybe the wrong assumption is that somebody else takes care of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Again, we're our worst enemies because we have scandals here all the time. We've got the post office scandal going on at the moment. We've had the blood scandal going on, and these go on for years, David. And unfortunately, people bullshit and lie to protect their career or their ego. And that's a very sad situation. But if we look at that, and I'm going to give you an example right here, right now. Verizon, known as the cyber warriors of the world, okay? They've been parachuted in, metaphorically, to major breaches, Target being one of them. Let me give you this case scenario, which is why people either love me or hate me. Verizon, up until 6 months ago, never once looked at the red, blue, or purple teaming at DNS. Although 95% of cyber attacks, malware, and bots rely on DNS, they never once included that. until 6 months ago when they kept following me and gone, this guy's right. Why aren't we doing this? So here's the challenge you've got, because especially America, but we've become more so, you've got litigation everywhere. Let me put this to you. If a big four was to charge 50 million, and I know one particular case which I'm citing, but I won't say it, is in the shipping world. Post-event of a cyber attack, they charged 50 million, but they never once looked at the DNS servers. And those DNS servers were exploited at the outset to cause the chaos and the cyber attack. And the day they've had their 50 million and walk away, they're still in the same position. What's the liability on that company if they are proven not to have done their job right? So Verizon, and I won't name him, but he's quite a good personal friend of mine. I said, look, you've got to tell them about this position. I'm showing you. I'm thrilled you've adopted our methodology and include DNS within your red teaming. I'm thrilled. It's a real kudos to us and good for you. First time, brilliant. In 2024, for crying out loud. I said, you've got to tell them that their own DNS is totally exposed. He said, oh, whoa, that's more than my job's worth. You see where I'm going with that? So it's very much a case of a bit like the paper I'm putting together now for the attorneys and the major lawsuit that's going on. To prove security negligence is easy. To get security professionals to do the right thing is bloody hard. There's your problem.
And maybe litigation is good for business. It takes, in the case of, I think it was a Merck.
Yep.
They just settled after like 7 years. I mean, I can just imagine this bunch of legal firms, their attorneys are driving very nice vehicles and big houses, and
Sure.
And I think both sides.
Yeah.
So
the reality of that, David, look, the reality is when I met with Brad Smith of Microsoft, in London in 2023, and I gave him a copy of my book, the latest book, Digital Blood in the Hands, and it was just him and me. It wasn't a group. He was speaking. I took him aside and I spoke to him, and I said, Mr. Smith, I want to give you this copy. There's a lot of input in there that actually shows Microsoft not to be doing their job very well. First thing. Secondly, I want to tell you, we've been helping Microsoft off the record for some years, since 2020, when we found all their Israeli websites weren't secure because someone had forgot. And they'd been not secure for 3 years. And he's gone, oh, Andy, thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. I'll get someone to look at it. Not a word. They're a $3.5 trillion company business. They don't care. They don't care.
Yeah, that's another issue. If you look at SolarWinds is still around. I mean, they have, many lines of business. There are other companies that just got breached. They're still around. And look at the stock. I'm not going to name names, but the stock went down, and it seems like it's going back up.
Yeah,
and maybe that was, again, maybe it was done as opportunistic for some investment firms to buy stock in the cheap.
Well, here's the thing, David. You are spot on. It is in my first book, so I can tell you about it. I'll repeat it. 2 days before SolarWinds in December 2020, on the Monday, SolarWinds sold $273 million worth of stock to a Canadian pension fund. On the Wednesday, they publicly announced the cyber attack. They knew about the attack on the Monday. Okay, that's criminal. That's insider trading. But SolarWinds stock went down 85%. There are people in Canada, and people go, oh, Andy, you've got a big mouth. You're telling everyone these problems. There are people in Canada that can barely afford to eat because their pension can't afford to pay them. But the very same people that were the investors in SolarWinds, had 2 seats on the board, decided on the Monday to sell $273 million worth of stock, knowing it was going to plummet. because it was good for their business. That makes me sick to my stomach. They're just playing with it.
And you know what we say out there? We say it out loud. Maybe 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people. You have 30,000 connection. We have 1,000 mutual connection. We have 15,000 connections.
Yep.
You know, we're saying it out there. Yet again, it seems like the underlying citizens have no power for the powers that be to make any change. And it seems like because there's so much money involved, insider trading is only applicable if you're a little guy or a little gal.
Yeah.
That you made $2,000, $10,000 because your spouse told you something. It's not insider trading when there's 250 million.
Let's evolve it further into human life, David, because that's where we're going, and we're already there. Early this year, the NHS, the National Health Service in England, suffered a major cyber attack. Okay, and it closed and stopped 10,000 operations. It wasn't the NHS, it was actually a company called Synovis, which were the blood company that had a cyber attack back in April in Italy, but they're based all over Europe and America. And we went to Synovis because we're very proactive. We went to Synovis and said, look, all your servers are exposed. It's no wonder why you suffered a cyber attack. Well, the silence was deafening. So we go to the NHS and I speak to the chief medical officer and the data protection officer, and I show them the evidence, not only of Synovis's position, which clearly questions their procurement capability and due diligence, clearly. So that's now panicking people. Oh, God, we might get sacked. But more importantly, they turned a blind eye to all of this, including their own exposure, because it said they weren't doing their job very well. People's lives were lost because people don't do their jobs very well. Not because I'm wrong, not because I'm big mouth, not because I'm wrong.
If you're making, and I think that what happened is if you're an executive in one of these companies and you look at their publicly available salaries, they're making millions every year. By the time, they do it for 10 years, they're independently wealthy. I mean, the odds of them, even if they get fired tomorrow, they're still doing quite well. They're not, hungry for anything. And I think maybe that's the cause of not caring, because they also, I think once you have that kind of wealth, you're very detached from the rest of society. You don't stay at the same hotels, you don't shop, you don't get healthcare wherever. They're not worried about their healthcare. They have private, private everything.
We call it
so that disconnect is paramount, I think, in terms of the decision making being made. Because if it had impact in their own, families, in their own, it would make a difference.
This is exactly what I said to the chief medical officer and data protection officer. Does it need one of your children to lose an operation and die before you listen? Doesn't matter what wealth you've got. I know people that have got more wealth than you can imagine, but they're dying. They've got cancer or they're having a treatment. They would give it all up for their health. Now, does that same situation apply to the National Health Service or others? You had a massive one, the United Healthcare Group. Does the same issue apply if they can't get the medication and treatment they need? Do they then start prioritizing security? And when I say security, I'm not talking about a narrative that says, oh, we're doing all the right things, we're paying out the right money. I'm talking about basic security. Basic security that I can't find a gap in the first 5 minutes. Because that isn't security, that's just bullshit. The challenge you've got, in August of last year, we were very proactive, and you may recall, we tried, I spent 11 o'clock at night, I was on the phone to 20 people of the New York Metro company 3 years ago. And I showed them some of their problems. 12 months after they had a cyber attack, you may remember, after WMD or something like that. I spent an hour and a half on the phone with these people, and they've gone, "Oh my God, we had no idea. They're all in security, but they have no idea of what their internet assets look like. So they had a not secure login, and for people to buy tickets, it was just bizarre. They suffered a cyber attack. Well, in 2023, last August, we have the thing called Transport for London. It's a UK government thing. They run the trains, the buses, and everything else. I wrote to their chief executive and I said, we connected on LinkedIn, which is what I predominantly do. And I shared some information with them, threat intelligence. And it's not biased, it's not opinionated, it's just fact. So he said, I'm going to get my team to contact you. I said, please do. I'm happy to help. We're not free, we're not a charity, but we're happy to help. So they send me an email to set up a call. I sit on the call 15 minutes, they don't even turn up. Okay, that's one thing. That's just rude. It's unprofessional. It's rude. I got a call an hour later saying, oh, yeah, the guy that was due to have the call with you isn't coming in today. So I don't know why he's done that. I go, oh, okay. 2 weeks ago, they suffered a cyber attack, David, because their servers weren't secure. And the implications are tens of millions of pounds that are disrupting. It's taken people's PII data. You're very familiar with PII data. It's taking their credit card details. In years to come, you will see that people are taking loans out in other people's names. They may even lose their house because if they go on holiday, they may move in, change the keys, change the locks, and sell their house. That sort of stuff is going on right now. Traditional crime being fueled and allowing a foothold by cybercrime. It's just preposterous. It's criminal. In actual fact, I think it's criminal. It's not negligent. Is criminal.
But there's no accountability, meaning
literally none.
There's nobody to come back to and say, even if you, what are you going to do? You're going to take them to court. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, sure. you obviously showed that this was preventable.
Yep.
And if all you have to do is do due diligence, and there's no excuse because you actually showed them, so they didn't have to find it on their own. Yet nothing happened.
We had a breakthrough in the last 2 months. We've had a breakthrough. Although we're not getting applauded for it or thanked for it, we've had a breakthrough. In the UK, we have, it's called the Office of Nuclear Regulators or Regulation. And they are the regulators for all the nuclear power operators in the UK. You'll have a similar thing in your country. We've actually spoken to them, but they didn't want to listen. TVA is one of them. It's one of the biggest. And we shared information with Sellafield. Sellafield had a cyber attack late last year. Sellafield is one of the primary nuclear power facilities in the UK. It's now being decommissioned, but nonetheless, there's still a lot of information and a lot of nuclear waste there. We showed Sellafield, who chose to ignore the information we shared. So we went to the regulator, thinking, well, the regulator is going to do the right thing. The regulator took the information and they sued Sellafield. And they successfully sued Sellafield for maintaining insecure servers and insecure basic security measures. And Sellafield went, we're guilty. We gave the evidence for that information. We gave the demonstrable information and threat intelligence to find Sellafield guilty. Now, that's quite a coup because much the same as the corruption and criminality that goes on in most governments, we're sure that goes on here as much as it does there. And for the regulator to sue what is a Quango government nuclear facility, that was quite a milestone because you can't just keep getting away with it. You cannot just keep gaslighting and think it's okay. The economy's suffering, people are suffering, and that's the masses.
And if you look at the past, Sarbanes-Oxley was doing quite well in order for us to have a more accountable financial system.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going with this. Do we need maybe that's a first for you, but maybe we need to set in stone and put a regulatory almost like Sarbanes-Oxley type of regulation on the cyber front and hold all these people accountable and throw them in jail for not. And I think for a while they was saying, okay, now executives are accountable. They can be personally liable for breaches and covering up and so on and so on. But yet we haven't, and I thought it would be more impactful, but yet hasn't really.
David, I think you're right. It always concerns me. We've had more, the world is full of compliance and regulations that aren't adhered to. And you've got PwC and others around the world advising how to circumvent regulations. It's just mind blowing.
Is that what they do? I thought they're consulting how to support regulation. No,
absolutely. They walk both sides of the street. Okay, that goes on all the time. But here's a situation. I agree with your philosophy, but we show governments and the regulators, NATO, all of their exposed positions, and they go, eh. So we've got a situation right now. I've sent an email this morning and I've said, when this goes to court, we will be providing expert witnesses. And I'll tell you the exact story. I published some about it this morning. In the UK, we have one major provider for all of the internet and educational sector, computers, email systems, the whole gambit, okay? We call that centralized funding. That centralized funding provider also now provides PDNS capability to the National Cybersecurity Centre, okay? They're not in bed much at all, you understand. We've been showing this provider since 2019 of their exposed positions of basic I could give you an IP address right now on this line. You could type it in, you go, oh my God, this is their cybersecurity arm. It's a not secure website.
Can I make a little bit of money, Andy? Because I'm taking notes. You can run a...
Right. So they threatened legal action against me. They said, you mustn't keep writing to us telling us we got these problems. We're experts. What do you know? And we're going to sue you if you keep telling us. Interesting concept. Last year, David, it's a relative term, 300 United Kingdom schools suffered cyber attacks. We've got a single point of failure here, the providers of technology and internet services to those 300 schools. They're maintaining insecure servers. Now, I'm sure like me, you've got children. I've got 4. They're all older now, but they're not at school. But anyone who's got children at school in the UK, their children's feet are being held to the fire by the very providers of technology that the government endorse and we pay. Can someone tell me the rationale and logic to that?
In why there's no bodies that are separate. They can solve it and say, okay, like, listen, we can create a body that is fully independent, maybe supported by the government, maybe not, maybe private.
Yeah.
To enforce, review, just like there is with financials. There's accounting firms that supposedly to come in and do audit. They're independent. They provide an audit, and then whatever the audit finds, then they have to fix it. Yet in this particular case,
I agree with you. But the regulators and even the SEC, I could send you 50 emails I've had with the SEC on the SolarWinds case. There is possibly no one else in the world that has the communications and the information that we have from 2020 onwards with SolarWinds. And the SEC have taken them to court for not telling their shareholders the right information.
That's it?
That's it. And they're losing. And I've gone, hold on a minute. We're prepared. You call it a whistleblower. We're prepared to be the experts, provide the information to show that SolarWinds did not do their job right then and still don't do it right now. And you want to say they didn't treat the disclosure correctly?
And it's remarkable because I remember when SolarWinds, people were comparing it to the, atom bomb, like from a impact perspective. Yet, fast forward, yet we have another one and another one. Yeah. There's always, and like you mentioned,
what you've got to appreciate, David, is I'm going to give you a little bit of my conspiracy theory bit here. What we must realize is these tech giants also provide surveillance capability for governments. So they've got a conflict of interest. SolarWinds should never be in business. Period. End of story. And that's not, I'm not being an ass about that. To lose 85% of their value, to do the damage to 18,000 customers, to pay 27 million to shareholders for inappropriate conduct. SolarWinds should not be in business today, and certainly should not have anywhere near a CMMC compliance badge and supply US government. But because they work with the government are compromised to say, we're going to let them get away with a certain amount. It can be the only rationale for the SEC to go, Andy, we've seen some of the stuff you're sharing with us. It's blowing our mind. I can show you right now a SolarWinds thwack login that's not secure. 4 years after the event.
Yeah,
it's just mental. How can anyone? I think General Michael Hayden said, "Catch us out once, shame on you. Catch us out twice, shame on us." And yet nobody is doing the basics correctly enough, David, to actually shut the door, even though the horse is bolted. There's no point in leaving it open. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's what's happening. So it seems like there's too much conflict of interest. There's too much big money, and there's collusion between all these private industries, governments, and so on. And therefore, there's no end in sight. Now, let's. I like to always kind of
everything's fine.
I like to always So let's talk a bit about what can people do.
Yeah.
Because we can't possibly. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
Somebody like yourself, I wish we had 50 like you. Maybe that would make an impact. But I mean, you just, you cannot possibly. You almost sound like a little bit like the Don Quixote, like just kind of goes out there and try to fight.
Yeah.
But if anybody listens to this and in their own micro space, either as individuals or somebody's running a business, and maybe you're not a big conglomerate, maybe you're running a dental office with 3 locations, or you're running a mill of some sorts, or a printing shop, or something like that. Yeah. What can you do to, at least in your own, little micro environment, to make sure you're not
with limited knowledge? Okay.
Yeah.
Look, the first thing, they did a study in Australia a couple of years ago, and everything is connected via the internet, whether you be on your phone or laptop or whatever. If you're going to go on the internet, there's a number of things you must do, and one of them is, if you see a not secure website, get away from it. Don't go there. You will be enforced and caught in entrapped insecurity through others, but at least follow that basic rule. In Australia, they did this two and a half years ago. 96% of people still went on a not secure website when they were shown a not secure website, and and many of them actually put their own details in, their credit card and things. And you go, this is just crazy. So you can protect yourself that way. Apart from that,
and by the way, Andy, just to double click on it, I've heard that some malware sites have certificates, meaning that they're securing.
Oh, David, don't start me off. Look, in 2020, when we helped the FBI, we were very prolific in and proactive in looking at ransomware groups. And we, at the time, if you remember, Maze was a major ransomware group. Okay, it was huge. And they attacked a number of the critical infrastructure sites and the nuclear warhead producer in America. And we got all the data together. Well, we were working with, I won't name him, but the head of the FBI, former head of the FBI UK, who just happened to go and work for Microsoft, you understand. We were working with him and your team in America. And we said to them, right, now we've helped you with that. We've got a situation. This is all, pro bono. We've not got a dime in it. All our time, all our effort, all our expertise. Not a dime. Barely a thank you. So we said to the FBI, look, we've been tracking and researching May's ransomware. We have names, addresses, IP addresses, phone numbers, contact details, email addresses. We can show the traversing of money flows from country to country. Can we talk to you about it? They said, if you want to give us that information for free, we'll look at it. If you want us to pay you, we're not interested. So I turned around and said, well, hold on, look, we have bills to pay too. We genuinely do. And although you might think we're a registered charity, we are not.
And not even then. Like, I don't understand. You provide value. What's the...
We never gave that information, and we stopped tracking Mays. And there was another group then, ADP, and others and others. So the reality on all of it is, for whatever reason, and I think it's when we found Russian and Chinese root certificates in a critical infrastructure in the UK that just happened to build submarines, I think that paid piece of work, we got blackballed. So when we went to the CIA and FBI and were working and helping them with these things, they said, you got to go back and get permission from your own people. Well, we're treated like very poorly here, very poorly. We've actually been blackballed to extents where companies have instigated working with us and then retracted it. And here's the problem, David, because they are protecting, and it's human nature, it's wrong, but the narrative is we're doing everything we can to protect you, but we don't want anyone to know what we've been doing. Love him or hate him, Edward Snowden had to flee to Russia. Love him or hate him, I'm not saying either way, because he told people what they were doing. Well, we're not saying what they were doing, although we have uncovered flying pigs and hush puppy digital certificates embedded in major organizations, which are GCHQ. People don't know GCHQ have been taken to court twice for privacy violations and lost both. They've lost both because they were implanting certificates into companies without permission for eavesdropping. This is part of their surveillance tactics. Years ago, if you go back to the Cold War, they were doing this on IBM golf ball machines with radio frequencies. Now they do it with an IP address. I had lunch with the former head of the MI6 3 years ago, just before COVID, 4 years ago. And we spent 3 hours at lunch. I'd never met him before. And I won't give you his name. And he said, my God, you're an impressive man. He said, if I was still in the foot, I'd want to recruit you. You're amazing. He said, but you guys have got it easy now. And he told me a story, and it's in my book, so I'm going to tell you. In his day, during the Cold War, when a Russian or Chinese ambassador would come to London, he said, we had to be creative of where we would put the plants and the bugs. He said, we fine-tuned it to such an extent that a door hinge, we would remove the pin and we'd have a bug inside the pin. He said, now all you need is an IP address. And he's right.
And they just uncovered, it was somebody at the, I think, New York City government officials that was a Chinese operator. Yeah. And maybe that's why in Russia, I don't know if that's true or not, but the rumor has it that they returned to, their secret agency to return to pen and paper.
Sure. You can't blame anyone for doing that. You genuinely can't blame anyone for doing that because, with everything that's going on, ask yourself a question. Here's a really interesting one. When we started the company 5-6 years ago, we were buying laptops and machines, etc. And one of my team was former GCHQ, and he was freelance for GCHQ. And at the time, we were getting involved in certificates on a big scale. Why do you think Microsoft were issuing all their products and services, including a Chinese certificate, apart from what they were supplying to the Department of Defense? Think about that. It's not a good position. And then I wrote, someone published something this morning, and I said, no, this came out months ago. The DoD have out-of-hours calls to China for support. Did you know that?
Mm-mm.
The guy actually wrote, he's a Department of Defense operative, and he wrote on LinkedIn publicly, he said, "Can someone tell me the rationale or logic of why at 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening, when office hours for the US Microsoft support team are closed, I go through to someone in China?"
It's outsourced. I mean, they just want to cut costs.
Bizarre. It's just bizarre. What do you think might happen there? What do you think might be the connotation?
I don't know.
Give me your password and your IP address, and I'm in. Thank you very much. It's bizarre. We're not doing ourselves any favors. And as Ronald Reagan rightly said, the scariest 9 words in the English language is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." They're not going to come over the hill and save you. They genuinely, I'll tell you one more story. In 2021, our electoral commission, it plays on the vote.gov scenario. In 2021, August 2021, our electoral commission that collates every single adult voter's information, PII data, suffered a cyber attack. And it wasn't found out until October 2022. Okay? It wasn't told to the public until the 8th of August 2023. I remember that is my father's birthday. So for over a year, they suffered a cyber attack, and over 40 million people, it's all relative, I know you got 300 million, but 40 million adults, data in the UK was exfiltrated for nefarious purposes. The connotations and implications are vast. The NCSC, the National Cybersecurity, was dropped in. NCSC is part of GCHQ. They're the forward-facing arm. They were dropped in as experts to deal with it and found that the infiltration had started in August 2021 and went on to October 2022. They managed it and dealt with it, but they came out and announced it in August 2023, so nearly a year later, which is against all rules and regulations, as we know. Why are those servers still not secure to this day? Why are they based out in America for the UK's Electoral Commission on DNS servers that are on the DNS blacklist? Why might that be? Either someone's not doing their job very well, or there's a lot of incompetence, or there's some collusion. There's no other way to look at it. I've actually told them, wait for this, I told the NCSC in an email, and 3 weeks later I got one back saying, if you'd like to follow the process and channels to report exposure, we might consider it. And I said, we're talking about national security here. When we helped the FAA on the 11th of January 2023, on the very same day they actioned our intelligence, and the airspace was opened up later that day. I cannot deny or confirm if a ransom was paid, but I suspect it was. The NOTAMs servers, which are the Notice to Airmen, if you don't know, Notice to Airmen servers, they'd lost command control. They had no certificate on it, and they'd lost command control. Okay? On the very day we told them, they actioned it. The FBI, on the very day we told them, they actioned it. Our own intelligence services were showing them national security exposure, and they've gone, you've got to follow a process. Interesting concept.
So why don't you follow the process, Andy?
We've followed the process many times. It led nowhere. It led nowhere.
They probably have your, the regular expression with your email address redirected to dev.dash/no. That's what I think is happening.
Absolutely.
You should try maybe with another email address, or maybe change it.
Use my Proton. They know, but look, what we've got to understand, David, is the big players work with the government. Okay, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, CrowdStrike, any of them, they all work with the government, and the government are their paymasters. Whether we acknowledge it or not, they do what the governments say. And the government obviously are clearly biased. We've lost two senior people in the executive area of the NCSC in the last 2 years. The rumours are that there was some bad things going on, double dipping, and more than singular agency work. So, these guys aren't above being a little bit complicit with things they shouldn't be. No more than, I think there's most probably 100, 200 FBI, CIA agents taken to court each year for being corrupt. We'd be naive to think that the military-industrial complex don't enjoy benefits from cyber war as they do from kinetic war. We'd be naive to think that. Equally, look, conspiracy theory aside, John F. Kennedy was killed because he tried to stop wars. He tried to reduce the military-industrial complex control of the United States. He was killed for it. The American intelligence agencies killed their own president because he wasn't adhering to their ways of thinking.
What did you think about what's happening now with the CEO of Telegram?
I've written to him. I think the fact that the narrative is that he wasn't, he was conspiring and colluding to utilize the data for other means, I think is a little bit of a narrative and unfounded in some ways. I have evidence. We've done research on WhatsApp, Signal, and all the rest of them, Wire and all the rest of them. None of them are secure. None. Equally, if you look at Proton Email or any other, or, DuckDuckGo and others, it's all a false narrative. It's a GUI. None of them are secure. They're all hopping using insecure servers. So the front end, they make, oh, yes, we do this, that, and the other. And it blows me away. They're spending millions on adverts and VPNs. They're spending millions on adverts and gaining billions in revenue because the perception from Joe Public is they're a bit more secure. When in actual fact, it's not the case at all.
Is it by design?
Definitely. Yeah, trust me, there will be. We had contacts and conversations with Proton. Bearing in mind, one of my top team is an ex-cyber warrior for the US Air Force. The CISO for Proton is an ex-cyber force warrior for the US Air Force. Different age, but nonetheless, there's that allegiance. When we started showing the evidence of how their email systems were working, hopping from one server to another and being exposed, they gaslighted us. They just gone, well, no, we don't want to talk to you anymore. What did we do? Apart from show you the problems. So what, hypothesizing a little bit, let me add the word hypothesizing.
Allegedly, hypothesizing.
Allegedly. They're collating the emails with the belief of the users that they're secure, when in actual fact, they're just providing them the same as every other email supplier, and they're being cached into servers that are being accessed by agencies. Make no bones about that. I can give you the IP addresses. I can tell you where they're based. But nobody wants to listen.
And it's interesting because that's exactly what you want. If you're looking to do some surveillance, you want people to think that their communication is secure, because that's the only time they'll be able to.
Let's go back a bit, David, to the heady days of 2001. Okay, I was 23 years younger, so were you, and security wasn't so much on the agenda. We had the 9/11 incident, and behind the scenes, some of the big tech giants were really trying to manipulate and abuse the internet for their own purposes. But that was making billions on the back of people's data. That really was. That wasn't in people's scope at the time. If you then go forward to 2008, when Stuxnet happened, and it was the first kinetic attack, effectively using code, that changed the game plan for everyone, as did Edward Snowden's book in 2012, 2013 of how they were doing it. But if you then stay around 2010, I may be out 6 months either way. But in 2010 or thereabouts, the new directives came out, and the new directive said, we don't want to go to a video store called Blockbuster and buy and rent a video. They're old hat, whether it's VHS or Betamax. We want digital streaming. And the birth of Spotify and Instagram and other social media platforms really started to spring up. And it changed everything. It changed everything. What you then had were the consumers of these things going, well, we don't want any latency. We don't want to watch something going around waiting for a hookup. We want it instantly. So a directive, I don't know who, but a directive came out that said, well, hold on a minute. We can capitalize on this. If we can provide DNS outsourced provision by a handful, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, IBM, you name them, if we can get those guys to provide domain name system, DNS and CDN, Cloudflare, Akamai, and others, they will distribute and control all of the servers and all of the data and the packets around the world. We can get access to all of that in one shop, as opposed to having to ferry around. First thing. Secondly, what about if we sell it to Bank of America? Anyone, but let's say Bank of America. And Bank of America at that time would have had data centers all over the place, costing hundreds of millions of pounds, and go to Bank of America's chief executive and go, if you're spending $1 billion on data centers, how would you like that to be 200 million a year? That would show you making 800 million more this year and next year and the next year on your bottom line. You could actually pay yourself more bonuses. He goes, oh, fantastic. So we moved from CapEx, capital expenditure, onto OpEx, operating expenditure. It's going to cost you a lot more, but you're renting instead of buying. Now, you CISO says, well, we've outsourced to Cloudflare or Akamai or whomever. We've outsourced to CDN, so we don't have any data centers now. We don't need to worry about that and the cooling and the management and the upgrading. Oh, that's their problem. And we've outsourced the DNS to Infoblox or one of the others or whatever. We've outsourced all of that. No one's doing any due diligence or checking on security, though. You can outsource everything but responsibility. So the back doors, and trust me, we expose this all the time, the back doors through DNS provision, CDN provision is a constant. And you go, so you've got the surveillance side, and I'm very outspoken about that. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but it's too intrusive. You've got the surveillance side using these servers, but they're also exposed for cybercriminals to exploit them too. How can that be okay? So going back to your earlier question, and it's a very pertinent question, what can Joe Public do to try and secure themselves? The real answer is very little. If they use the internet for any purpose whatsoever, very, very little. These guys have got you by the balls. Well, and until people stand up and make that statement, which is why we're not, adhered to by everyone, because people go, well, that's too frightening, surely, but it's the fact. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the government would have us working with them all the time.
That's right. And I don't want to part ways before kind of the next iteration of where things are going with AI and these large language models.
Yeah.
And the reliance is, because it seems like we're the next evolution. Yeah, the next evolution. So, for example, I think now instead of searching for something just on the search engine on Google or whatnot, you just ask an LLM, you ask an AI, and that data is being collected by these LLMs. We're talking about trillions of data points, which nobody knows where it's coming from.
Yeah,
and then we don't know where it's coming from, but we already shown. There's some studies showing that there's influence on these engines in terms of what they spit out. There's influence either through poisoning or like modification of the algorithms to spit out, and we've seen some crazy examples of that.
Yeah.
So that's the next iteration up of what, because our reliance on these AI engines will exponentially increase in the next decades or so.
Yeah.
So I suspect that some of these problems that you floated up are going to be just as severe in these AIs. And I know that
Yeah.
they're trying to have, there's a whole section of explainable AI, XAI, and
Yeah.
be and accountability and transparency and all of that. But that's not happening,
Yeah.
not anytime soon. What's your take
David,
on it?
I'll tell you two stories. And I tell stories because people can remember them, but they're factual. They're not embellished in any way. In 2019, I was a guest, and I forget his surname, but his name is Andy. He was the quantum computer expert for IBM. And I met him at an event he was presenting. And they had a mock-up and lots of videos and stuff going on. And I took him aside, and we knew some similar people. We shared, people. And I said to him, what are you doing about the PKI side of things? Because quantum computing for a long time in the foreseeable future will be a blend of hybrid and classical and quantum. And he said, yeah, you're perfectly right. And I said, so what are you doing about the PKI side? Because at the moment it's atrocious. It's a mess. Nobody's got any control. So he said, do you know what? We haven't thought about that. And they still haven't. Okay, so quantum computing, and I use this throwaway content, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone who's religious, but it won't be the meek that inherit the earth. It'll be a criminal with a quantum computer. And then in April this year, I was invited to chair a meeting in Copenhagen. And I chaired this meeting, and the meeting was billed as AI and cybersecurity. Okay, and in the room were the top 60 CISOs and CIOs for the top 60 companies in Denmark and surrounding region, all paying thousands of euros to be there for one day. And I'm chairing the meeting. So I get there the day before, I meet the people, we're talking about this, that, and the other. I'm not prepared for any of it. I'm just being me. So everyone comes in. There's 3 vendors there. And everyone comes in and everyone sits down, and I welcome everyone. And I say, before we start and before I interview my guests, who I've never met before, I want to ask 2 questions of you all. You're CIOs and CISOs, so you're in the technology and security business. You understand where AI is, and we're going to discuss that today, and the implications of that. Let me ask you 2 questions. One, this huge room, it was vast. I said, how did you all get in this room? And they all looked a bit perplexed and said, well, we came through that pair of doors. I said, thank you. That's where cybercrime goes wrong and cyber attacks are eased. If those doors are left open, you can walk straight in. What would have happened if I'd have locked them and you couldn't get in? They said, we couldn't get access. That's where cybercrime stops and finishes. Shut the doors, lock them. Don't give access first. Secondly, how many of you, of the 60 people, manage, control, and look after your internet assets, including DNS, and have a very good understanding of DNS? 6 people put their hand up. And I think those 6 were lying. Okay? The point being is, literally without exception, none of them were managing DNS, and they were all focused on what AI could do for them. That is a barometer of the entire globe's vision on AI and quantum, blockchain and others. People aren't thinking, going back to when the early days of the 80s and 90s, people are thinking functionality, not security. And that's still the case today, and it's getting compounded and worse.
Yes, there's the latest report by some major AI brains that just basically issued saying that there's only 3% of all investment in AI goes into securing AI.
And I think that's hyped. We did it. We were asked to do this, and we looked at the biggest players, ChatGPT and others, OpenAI and others. And we did some research. Not one of them had good basic security. All their servers were exposed. So again, a little bit like the surveillance scenario from the 2010 period to date, collate it all in one place. Don't ask for permission. Don't even ask for forgiveness. Just get the data. We decide what we do, and if we pay a fine down the road, it'll come out of the tax dollars. That's the problem we got. So what do we need, David? What do we need to make the change? We need CEOs that aren't corrupt, that aren't complicit, and that want to listen and do the job properly to protect humanity. Sounds a mouthful, sounds incredible, but it's the truth. People will continue dying at pace through cyber attacks and the implications and byproducts of cyber attacks, as we saw in Ukraine, as we see water plants taken out, electric plants taken out, nuclear plants taken out. People will start suffering more and they will lose their lives as a consequence. And unless we do something about it, and we've got these people in the military industrial complex going, how can we leverage more and more internet capability and digital communications for warfare than to say, how can we leverage it more to secure and protect people? That's quite a profound thing. And I suspect your 97.3% ratio is alive and kicking in that too. People don't care. The vast majority of people don't care. People will die on Capitol Hill with $1 billion in their account, not giving a toss about anyone.
And that's the problem. So we're our own worst enemies, I think.
We are.
That's it. That's it. So, I mean, that's...
In truth, people, I didn't say it, but I will say it now. What can people do to protect themselves? People are their worst enemies. We really are our own worst enemies in the main. Because the CEOs I speak to on a daily basis, they go, oh, yeah, well, I spoke to the CISO. He told me everything's all right. Well, the CISO's covering his ass. I had this with Lloyd's of London. You know Lloyd's of London, the biggest insurance player in the market. I'll actually quote the names because it's in my book. John Neal is the CEO, and I've known him for some time. And I went to John Neal and I said, John, you've got some serious exposed positions here, which means the entire insurance market and financial market is at risk. Not just one company, but the whole market. So he goes, could you speak to Matthew Broomhill? He's my CISO. I said, of course, I'd be delighted. So Matthew comes on, he says, you're making a lot of noise. What's going on? I said, well, you've got these exposed positions. He said, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, okay, I'm going to share some information with you. Please stop being disrespectful. I'm going to share some information with you. I shared the information with them. And 2 weeks later, he came back on a Sunday and said, we fixed those. I thought you didn't have a problem. But you've taken the breadcrumbs I've given you and you've addressed them. Well, they were just examples. We found a Russian server inside Lloyd's of London. It was lloydsoflondon.ru. They don't have an office in Russia. Think about that. And they were telling us that we were blowing smoke up someone's backside. And you may or may not know, in 2022, they suffered a cyber attack. Surprise, surprise. Played it down and washed it away.
Well, maybe they had insurance.
I'm suspecting they were self-insuring, but on that occasion, but yes, they were certainly covering their ass. John Neal is retiring shortly, whether the CISO is still there, but people aren't doing their job properly, David, and it's not that we want to call them out, it's just that we're not prepared to bite our tongue and ignore the fact they aren't doing their job properly. End of story. We're trying to protect the people.
Absolutely, Andy. So where can people get a hold of your book and then also contact you for, to get the real deal, to get what's the easiest way?
Yeah, well, look, all my 3 books, the first book, Stuxnet to Sunburst, 20 Years of Digital Exploitation, Ransomware and Cybercrime, and Digital Blood on Their Hands, are all available on Amazon. They're all available. What can you do? They can email me, they can phone me. You're welcome to share that. andrew.jenkinson@cybersecip.com. And my number is a UK number. Just email me and I'll speak to anyone.
And I highly recommend for all those viewers to follow Andy. He's very prolific online, saying it like it is.
As it is.
As it is, like it is. And highly recommend.
300 trolls, David. I've got 300 trolls because I tell it as it is. And do you know what? Each one of them is a security guy.
Well, are you sure the trolls are not bots, like AI bots? Maybe like 80% of them are.
Some of them have been sacked because criminal cases were taken out against them. because they are doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. And the bit that really saddens me is, look, if as a security expert, go back to the story of the book, not the book, but the article I wrote for the Worshipful Company. Eventually, they listened. Eventually, they said, oh, shit, you're right. The FAA listened, and they said, you were right. The FBI listened, you were right. It's not that we're opinion or bias, we're telling it as it is. If you don't like it, don't ask. But if you do want to know, we're happy to share that with you.
And the fact is that you are making waves. It just means that you're doing the right thing. I mean, again, I find there's a lot of agreeableness online, especially among cybersecurity professionals on LinkedIn and other places. Everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Everybody agrees on certain
Nobody wants to put their head above the parapet.
No, and I think that's a problem because, again, if they're looking at their next roles, they're looking at their jobs. They don't want to make anything controversial.
We touched on this, didn't we? The guy at Verizon is a very senior guy. You'd know his name if I gave it to you, but he didn't want to go to his executives and say, we've got a problem, because he was in fear of his own job. That just smacks of bullshit to me, because and maybe he's right. Maybe his career may have ended there on that day. I don't know, but I would rather know I've got a problem and have an uncomfortable truth than a comfortable lie and wait for the shit to hit the fan. It doesn't make any sense to me, because we did this for Medibank in Australia, who had a major cyber attack. 10 million people's data was stolen, and they got away with it. Microsoft and I think it was Mandiant were dropped in to deal with all the problems. There's still problems today. And you go, well, who's kidding who? You may get being paid millions of dollars for a narrative and bullshit, but who's kidding who? It just makes no sense.
And I hope, again, I hope this conversation, what you're doing, is a step in the right direction. I think we collectively, it will take a village. It will take all of us to make that change. And and eventually, I think Rome wasn't built in a day. I think we're moving as fast as we can as a digital society. And eventually, somewhere, somehow, things need to be fixed. Otherwise, I think collectively we're going to suffer.
David, you're right. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it's on fire, and we've got to get people to stop giving out matches.
Just mic drop. That's it. There's nothing else I can say about this after this end.
All right.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
Very good. Absolutely. Have a wonderful day there, and I'll keep you posted.
Thank you again.
Thank you, David. Take care. Bye-bye.